Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 17, Looming Evil. Subaru. Reflecting upon the unbelievable truth, Subaru could feel his entire body awash with cold sweat. As far as Subaru knew, this was one of the most terrifying situations he could be in. A scenery he remembered, a conversation he had already heard before. This was not something like déjà vu. This was not an event that he thought had happened before, it was an event he was actually reliving. The reason for that was only one: he had returned by death. Subaru, but why? There was absolutely zero warning. Particularly for Subaru, it felt like the world had switched out in a blink of an eye. It felt so unreal to the point that it was enough to question whether the authority he carried had misactivated. And that for some reason, the death part of return by death had been dropped and only the return part had activated. Subaru, am I an idiot? No, I am definitely an idiot. Subaru disciplined himself as he attempted to look at this situation optimistically. It was a stupid statement, but he had to trust return by death. The power to reverse time that Subaru held had never once been activated without death as a trigger. By losing his life, Subaru would go back in time. That was a certainty. Subaru, okay, I'll accept it. I've accepted it. Now, me, what do I do? Pushing his fist into his forehead, Subaru told his panicked self to be calm. Now that he accepted that he had returned by death, the next point to focus on was his cause of death. He thought back to the events that had occurred only a few dozen seconds ago. Subaru. I can't think of anything. However, even when reflecting back on the time he had met his demise, he could not recall anything. He searched for the tiniest of clues in his memory, but turned up empty-handed. The bar which was their destination, a talking flop, the hustle and bustle of the main road getting quieter, the slight, unique smell of the shade in the alleyway, a faint, hard sound that was all he could scrounge up. None of them were linked to the reason as to why Subaru's life was in danger. Subaru, fuck, why am I always like this? If Subaru had been watchful regarding changes in his surroundings, he would not be exposed to this misery. He detested and cursed his own carelessness. However, the logical part of him understood that that was an impossible demand, and it turned an unamused eye towards himself. He was not a security camera. It was impossible to stay alert of his surroundings 24/7. He was not a genius that could take in the small changes in his environment and be able to form a plan to deal with them immediately. Natsuki Subaru was undoubtedly an ordinary person. That was the unchanging assessment he had given himself, even after experiencing his memories vicariously from the eyes of an outsider and seeing himself in a new light. That was why he could not stop thinking and moving forward. Subaru, the situation is similar to when Shala first killed me. Along the path to Pleiades Watchtower, Subaru's group, who was challenging the Sandwind at the Ogria Sand Dunes, had been annihilated by Shala, who was guarding the area from the watchtower to the Sandsea. The Sandsea's rite of passage had begun with a white light that could not be reacted to. It was that first strike which blew Subaru away and started the infernal fight afterwards. What had occurred? What was the cause of death? The situation where it was uncertain if he had died or not could be said to be a mercy bestowed by his first death at the Sandsea. However, unlike then, he was currently in the middle of a town. The environment was fundamentally different from the Sandsea, where he had the conviction to face the various dangers to his life. Subaru, what's going to take my life in this situation? A death with no forewarning. The only thing he could think of that fit the bill was still Shala's snipe, as it left a strong impression. That was why he may have been shot this time too. Subaru had died inside the alleyway. Although they were not tall, the surrounding buildings sandwiched them and created a space with poor visibility. If one were to shoot here, they could only do it from the front or back, but this was not the most ideal place for shooting, was what he thought. Of course, since Subaru did not know how accurate his memory was, the possibility that this position actually allowed an ideal line of sight was. Flop, mister? Why is your brow more wrinkled than before? Subaru, ah. Flop, weren't you listening to my advice? Your fortune will run away if you don't erase those wrinkles. To chase something that's run away is an arduous task. 'Cause I'm usually on an ox cart. Hitting his hand on his chest, Flop exaggeratedly gestured in front of Subaru. Sensing that this overaction of his had the purpose of cheering up Subaru's grimacing face, Subaru could not help but freeze up at his actions. To find his cause of death, he would have to investigate the suspect that was traveling with him at the time too. In the case that Subaru's cause of death was not by shooting, the most likely culprit was Flop, the person who was traveling with him, and the person that was nearest to him. However, at Subaru's time of death, Flop had been within his field of vision and there was no sign that Flop had taken action to attack him. Needless to say, Subaru knew that in this world, there was a plethora of attacks that could reap his life in a single strike without him noticing at all. Nevertheless, Flop did not seem like someone who could do that. First of all, Subaru, does Flop-san have a reason to kill me? The most likely possibility was that he had faked goodwill and was trying to mug Subaru. However, Subaru thought that doing so, purposefully, in the middle of a town, was a poor decision. They had met the O'Connell siblings for the first time at the queue outside the gate. If they wanted to do their deed without detection, all they had to do was to deceive and invite them somewhere outside the gate. All could be done before entering Guaral, a place with guards. Even if their objective was the money they could get by selling the witch beast's horn, in the end, the reason Subaru had not been cheated out when selling it was none other than Flop's help. There was no reason to trap Subaru. All they needed was to trick Subaru outside and steal the horn, and sell it once they got inside the city. There was no logical explanation for their motive. Quite a lot of people had killed Subaru until now, but they all possessed a rational explanation for doing so. Excluding witch beasts where communication was non-existent, that was a solid rule. That was why. Subaru, Flop-san? Why are you so nice to us? Flop, HM? That's a sudden question. Subaru, yeah, sorry about that. I got a bit worried. Flop raised his nicely shaped eyebrows in surprise at Subaru's abrupt question. Faking a chuckle at this reaction, Subaru held his breath, waiting for Flop's response. Logically, he did not doubt Flop. All that was left was whether he could believe him or not. Flop, who acted cordially and had performed various deeds to help them out. Subaru sought peace of mind, to believe that Flop and his sister Medium were not two-faced and that they could be trusted. Flop, Subaru did not know if his eyes betrayed his true feelings, but Flop narrowed his handsome eyes as if he could see those emotions. The expression he told Subaru to adopt before, a look overflowing with confidence and carefreeness yet devoid of any grounds for that, disappeared from his face, and was instead replaced with the face of an intellectual gentleman. And then he shook his head at the frozen Subaru. Flop, it's not a complex thing. It's simple. What my sister and I are doing by being good to Mr. and Mrs. and Niswai is. Subaru, is? Flop, is revenge. Subaru, eh? Raising his hands, Flop proclaimed that out loud. The strong and merry tone used, and the disturbing contents of the proclamation clashed with each other so much that, for one moment, Subaru could not take it in. Shocked, his eyes went wide. In front of the stiff Subaru, Flop brushed his fringe, and said, "Listen, okay? Flop, long ago, my sister and I were living on the edge of life and death. Thrown away by our parents, we grew up in a home that adopts orphans. That place was pretty terrible. Subaru, a home for orphans." At the back of Subaru's mind, an image of a home vaguely resembling an orphanage came up. However, it was not difficult to imagine that the facilities and equipment of this world's orphanages were much different than the modern buildings Subaru was thinking of. That terrible environment was probably something far worse than he could imagine. While revealing to Subaru the kind of environment he had grown up in, Flop gestured. Flop, every night, huddling with the other kids in the same boat as us, I decided in my heart to escape from that situation. And then, my sister and I got the chance, and were able to escape from there. For the first time ever, living through a night without being beat up, I vowed. Revenge, that is. Subaru, revenge as in, against the people at the home for orphans? Flop, no, not them. At the world. Having the same expression as before when proclaiming revenge, Flop hardened his fists. Towards the intimidated Subaru, Flop put his passionate face up front and... Flop, my sister and I grew up being beaten by the adults at that place. But, were the adults that punched us happy while they were punching me? No, they weren't. They were unhappy too. Unhappy adults were beating unhappy children. Is this kind of hopeless situation even real? Subaru. Flop, even adults who choose violence are unhappy. So I became a merchant to lift me and my sister out of misfortune. And as much as I could, we would bring others out of unhappiness as well. Just like how on that night, those people brought us out of it. Subaru, that's your revenge against the world? Flop, that's right. Me and my sister are resisting against the world which pushes misfortune onto us for revenge. Helping you and your missus is also a part of that. After declaring that, Flop scratched his nose in slight embarrassment. Receiving the fire in his words and actions, Subaru lost the ability to speak. The heat from that fire slowly seeped into his brain, and there, he came to a snap decision. Subaru, thank you, Flop-san. I'm glad I met you siblings, Flop-san and Medium-san, at the queue. Whether he could believe them or not, he wished for a response that would point to the answer of that question. And the response he had received was far more than he expected. And so it was decided. Subaru would not doubt Flop O'Connell's goodwill. He decided he would trust it to the end, his noble, vengeful heart which had decided to resist against the unfairness of the world. Meaning, all that was left was to Subaru, Flop-san, this street isn't really giving off a good KEH in the feng shui way. So is it alright if we could use a different path? Flop, KEH? What is KEH? Actually, is that the reason for the wrinkles in your brow and your eyes? Subaru, it's more like a fortune-telling item for good omens. It's got nothing to do with my eyes, I think. But yeah, this street's no good. I don't mind if we go the long way, so please? Depending on Flop's goodwill, Subaru forcefully advanced the conversation. Deciding that Flop was not the culprit, the next thing to do was to avoid the incoming death. Whether it was a ranged snipe or not, it was no mistake that this was an attack. If he were able to avoid the attack's condition for occurrence, that would result in him being able to avoid this death. To do that, first, it was crucial that he did not follow the same actions as he did before. Changing paths, delaying the timings, he would avoid the disaster that would occur to him before it happened. If he could do that, he should be able to dodge the unwanted death. Subaru, well, to begin with, I've never wanted to die in the furs. Well, only once or twice. And in addition to that, it was an unavoidable option due to the imminent state of affairs. When cornered in a situation where the only way to save someone was to die, in those times Subaru had chosen death. Yes, Subaru also desired revenge on the world. Flop, I don't know about that KEH thing, but I like your earnest expression. It'll be a bit of a detour, but why don't we take a different path? Subaru, that'd be a great help. Let's go to a main street with as many people as possible. Flop, gotcha. Fortunately, Flop listened to Subaru's unnatural suggestion without opposition. Following his lead, the plan for which way to go to the bar was changed. They turned back from the path they would have continued on and took a route to the tavern that would go through the main street, with minimal alleys. Ultimately, if they passed through the line of fire before the tavern, it was possible that it still would not change the fact someone was after Subaru. However, if he knew the attack were to happen in the alleys in front of the tavern, there would be many ways to deal with it. In the worst case, there was also the possibility his opponent might withdraw upon witnessing Subaru's vigilant look. Flop, well then mister, this way. Passing by Subaru's side, Flop began leading him down a different road. It was in that instant. By accident Flop looked over Subaru's shoulder, and his eyes widened as if he had just noticed something. Subaru, oh. What, he attempted to ascertain from Flop's response, but that was not realized. The reason being that, instead of a question coming from Subaru's mouth, his mouth had opened fully to spit out the blood it was teeming with. Subaru, It was a feat of a single moment. Subaru felt something seize the back of his head, forcing him to look up. Then, a hot sensation passed over his bare throat, and blood burst forth. Drowning in the overflowing blood in pain, Subaru understood his throat had been cut open. Subaru, Both hands pressed to the wound on his neck. Amidst the intense pain and blood loss, Subaru sought for a breakthrough solution. The wound was deep and wide, cutting through major blood vessels, blood gushing out. He would take off his outer garment and wrap it around his neck to halt the bleeding. No, the first priority here had to be to get away from the enemy behind him. Moreover, Flop was right there. He was wrong to have doubted him. Afterwards he would have faith in him, he might not be forgiven, but right here was Flop. Subaru, NGHH. Rem was at the inn. One way or another, even with blood flowing from his neck, he had to make it back to her. Go back, take her away, it's not safe, withdraw. Even if she hated him, drag her away. For Rem to live. She had to live. For that, the next bleeding, stop it. The blood, the blood, blood, the blood, stop it, stop, Stu. Subaru, you. Up. Flop, mister, it's no good to have a scowl on your face. Subaru. Flop, good fortune won't come to anyone who doesn't have the time to smile. You're going to try and find companions for your journey now, aren't you? Then, you need to find someone good. In front, Flop emphasized his point while grinding his finger against his own brow. While watching that man's gesture, Subaru promptly put both his hands to his own neck. He did not feel that hot sensation or the heat of life flowing out. The feeling of blood gushing forth with every heartbeat. Of his own life pouring out, the pulsation of despair approaching death. Flop, if that's the case, then erase those wrinkles on your brow. What's the matter, mister, your face has gone pale. Seeing Subaru keep silent, Flop looked surprised and became concerned. Despite that earnest gaze of his, just before Subaru, he was reminded of the moment his throat had been slashed open. Right, his throat had been cut. His throat was cut, blood spurted out, his instincts sounded the alarm that he had to get away. However, even if he could not hear those alarm bells, he came back to that moment. In other words, he had died. He had once again returned by death. In addition to that, this time was different with instant death from the outset. More explicit, in the form of hostility. Subaru, bois. With his hands on his throat, Subaru had forgotten to breathe, which he remembered in a hurry. Subaru raised his shoulders up and down with deep breaths. Flop touched his shoulder and asked if he was all right, but Subaru had no room to respond. However, he could not stay here either. Subaru, Flop-san, today, it's a terrible day for feng shui. Let's return at once. Flop, Fusui? Although, considering that pallor to rest a bit would be. Subaru, no, resting would be a waste of time. This is a fit that won't stop until Rem holds my hand. Flop, is that right? What an affliction that is! With a sense of uneasiness and urgency burning in his heart, he had blurted out nonsense, but the good-natured Flop gave more importance to the atmosphere than the content of words. The hand that had grasped his shoulder was grabbed in turn, and Flop nodded in surprise. Pulling on that hand of Flop's, Subaru hesitated as to whether to head forward or back. If they went forward they would be en route, but if they went back they would go by where he had had his throat slit. He felt he was at an impasse where whichever way they went his life would be in danger, so rather than forward or backward, he would return to the main street via some other alleyway. He had failed before, but his opponent would try not to kill Subaru, somewhere in the public eye. If he was going to alert his opponent, getting to the main road was imperative. Flop, mister. Your hand is super cold. We should get your wife to warm them up soon. Subaru, as soon as possible, I want to see Rem's face. As a result, he did not care about the abuse he would face for returning without accomplishing his goal. At any rate, to that place with Rem? Subaru, no. Can I go back? The question swirled in Subaru's mind. In a situation where he had not yet grasped his enemy's true nature, he thought about the danger of going back to Rem. He was unaware of when his opponent had begun targeting him, but if they returned to the inn, he may be kindly revealing the location to his foe. Subaru. Cursing his lack of thought, Subaru bit his lip and at the same time, his field of vision opened. Exiting the alleyway, Subaru and Flop had made it to the main streets of the city. On the right and the left, the number of people coming and going could not be compared to a metropolis, but it was a hell of a lot better than the alleyways with their hideout-like taverns. Nonetheless, it would take some nerve to dive into the crowd of people. To avoid that, he would have to decide on a guideline for their next course of action. Flop, if we're on this street here, that means the inn should be over there. So then, this way. Subaru, that's no good, Flop-san. We can't go back to the inn. To see Rem, such a thing would be inexcusable. Flop, isn't that different from what you just said? His conduct ended up being that of an emotionally unstable person, but his anxiety from before made it so he was incapable of returning to Rem's side. That being said, it was also ungrateful to keep manipulating Flop without giving him any information. But, what could he say to make him understand? He was not an associate of the Amelia camp, nor a long-time traveling companion like Anastasia or Julius. He had no powers of persuasion or grounds to make him take Subaru's opinion seriously. Even for this, it would be asking too much to pin his hopes on Flop's innate goodness. Subaru, damn it. To break the deadlock of the situation, currently Subaru's hand was sorely lacking. He was separated from his precious Rem, and was being hunted down in a strange town. He was with the virtuous Flop, but he lacked fighting strength. Subaru himself had no strong point to show. Without knowing who was attacking him, he did not know who to be wary of. Subaru, no way, the hunter. When he defined his opponent as an invisible assassin, the first possibility that came to Subaru's mind was the hunter. They were a dangerous person who had killed Subaru once in the Budheim jungle, and after that as well, they had aimed at him while he was with Rem on one occasion. Ultimately, he had not run into them even once since then, but what if they were still meticulously continuing to hunt Subaru? In the Budheim jungle, the military encampment, and the Shadrakian village, there had always been someone acting with Subaru. To avoid a setup with combat-ready opponents, they may have changed their timing until Subaru was with the powerless Flop. Subaru, if that's how it is, it's like you have the tenacity of a bear robbed of its prey. Why go this far to aim at me? What about me is the reason for? Flop, mister? You alright? What are you so worried about? If there's something I can help you with, you can try talking to me first. You're acting strange. Subaru, Flop-san. While Subaru was looking left and right down the street and losing his nerve, Flop called out to him in that voice. Directly across from him, Flop seized both his shoulders. His earnest gaze and offer made Subaru want to depend on him, and Subaru seriously considered if he should try gambling on his innate goodness. If it was Flop, he might have the faith to believe in Subaru and lend him a hand. Subaru, Flop-san, sorry to keep relying on you, but can I ask you something? Flop, of course, certainly. Whatever it is, even if I can't help, my sister might be able to. After all, my sister and I have the kind of bond where we can cover for each other's weak points, you know. Subaru, in truth, between the two of you this might be a matter for Medium-san though. If his opponent violently struck without mercy, there may be no choice but to respond with greater force. Medium's strength was much greater than Subaru's or Flop's. With that in mind, Subaru would try to explain the situation to Flop. Firstly, he would have to hide the matter of return by death, and explain that someone was relentlessly targeting him. Subaru, actually, someone is presently. Flop, what the? Subaru, huh? His mind made up, while being careful not to trigger the penalty of mentioning return by death, Subaru was going to try to explain the circumstances to Flop. However, just as he was about to speak, Flop's gaze turned toward the wrong direction. He raised his well-shaped brows and squinted in the direction of the street. By his reaction he seemed to have noticed something, and Subaru belatedly became aware of the same thing. Subaru, HK. A long way off, someone was screaming. And it was not just one person, several people shouted in shrieks and angry roars. Then the voices gradually increased in urgency, and sounds that differed from screams multiplied. Flop, wah! Eyes wide, Flop's throat closed, and Subaru also turned in the same direction. Immediately, witnessing what Flop had, the same scene before his eyes also left Subaru at a loss for words. A giant wheel was headed right for Flop and Subaru. Flop, mister, watch you. Flop's voice was cut off too early. The impact engulfed Subaru's entire body with its intensity. His body was totally blown away, it hit the hard ground and tumbled many times. The momentum did not stop, and he crashed into a wall. But that was not the end. Back to back, another successive impact hit the collapsed Subaru, and once more his body was blown away. Subaru, guh? Having been sent somersaulting and tumbling, Subaru's field of vision was dyed black as his body hit the ground. It was not as if the sky had suddenly been covered in clouds. It was something else. His field of view had been destroyed for a different reason. The cause he did not know, and even if he found out what it was, nothing good would come out of it. However, if there was something he could say. Subaru, DDEA. Death, that was something every cell in his whole body had been proclaiming towards Subaru's instinct. Up until this point, as someone who had experienced death over 30 times, Subaru was somewhat conscious of just how much damage his body was able to withstand before he lost his life. This time, it was clearly over the limit it could endure. Subaru. A festering pain. Yet, that was something on a whole other level compared to merely localized pain. This aching assaulted his entire body. The existence named Subaru was synchronized with the phenomenon called pain. This was not mere localized pain. Natsuki Subaru was precisely pain itself. Pain was what he was, and therefore it was only natural to be in pain. Anywhere and everywhere hurt. The pain did not disappear. From a distance rang a sound like that of tinnitus or similar to the whistle of a train, reverberating inside his head. Amidst that, the sounds which can be heard were the joys and sorrows of the people hurled into a maelstrom. Nay, there wasn't any joy. It was more fitting to call it a pandemonium. Pandemonium, ha! What a word! Contrary to the echo of sounds, the events that unfolded were overwhelmingly grave. Subaru, ahi, ow, ah. He could not produce any syllables. The mouth that attempted to enunciate words was in tatters. Without any teeth remaining, it had decent ventilation. Somewhere had been ripped apart and air was leaking through it. There was blood, sound, and pain. Something. Subaru, oh, ah. Something had killed Natsuki Subaru again. Flop, mister, it's no good to have a scowl on your face. Subaru. Flop, good fortune won't come to anyone who doesn't have the time to smile. You're going to try and find companions for your journey now, aren't you? Then, you need to find someone good. Putting his finger in between his eyebrows, Flop rubbed the skin and flesh to relax them. Watching the man's performance unfold in front of his eyes, Subaru hugged his own two shoulders. Then, he recalled his mouth which air no longer escaped from, as well as the pain that had vanished. It can't be, I died again. Subaru, moreover, this time, it was a dragon carriage, was it? Pulverized by the impact, sent flying and rendered immobile, the candle of life thinned and vanished. While dominated by the pain proclaimed by every inch of his body, Subaru had been killed. He had lost his life. Subaru. Clattering, the shoulders in his own grip trembled, and his knees began to shudder. Even if his body did not recall the disaster that had befallen it, his soul remembered. The impact and pain inflicted upon his whole body as if tearing it to pieces, even if it no longer remained, still gnawed at his soul. At last, Subaru could not conceal his fear towards the looming evil that befell upon him. First time was instant death, the second was being beheaded, the third was being run over by a dragon carriage. It could no longer be just a mere coincidence. No doubt, the aim was to kill Natsuki Subaru. It had killed Subaru mercilessly. The most frightening thing of it all was that, despite return by death having been triggered thrice, Subaru had obtained no further information other than the fact an enemy existed. The opponent would not leave behind any information for the lifeless Subaru. Flop, if that's the case, then erase those wrinkles on your brow. What's wrong, mister? You don't look so well. Subaru, Flop-san. Once again, Flop had shown concern towards Subaru, the latter's facial expression having changed. Earlier, the chaos on the main street was most likely the result of the dragon carriage going berserk. Then, in the instant before the collision, Flop had extended his hand in an attempt to save Subaru. Not making it on time, Subaru had received the deadly impact head-on, and it was unthinkable that Flop, nearby as he was, would have gotten off scratch-free. He would have been dragged into the collateral damages as well. Subaru, in the first place, up until now. The enemy would not necessarily retreat in content after killing Subaru. Flop had been there at the scene, and had witnessed the occurrences on both the first and second time. If the opponent was someone of caution, it would be natural for them to seal Flop's mouth, as he was a witness. Would it not mean that, up until now, Subaru's death would be accompanied by Flop's murder? Would it not mean that Flop had already been dragged into the situation Subaru was put in? I won't allow that, thought Subaru as he gritted the back of his teeth. Subaru, KH. Flop-san. Flop, W what? Killing any cowardice by gritting the back of his teeth, Subaru faced forward courageously. Next, with that enthusiasm, Subaru grabbed Flop by the hand, catching him by surprise. However, he did not have the leisure to take Flop's bewilderment into account. Considering what had happened so far, the countdown to death had already begun. A situation of dead end times 3, where moving forward meant hell, heading back meant hell, going around still meant hell. Even then, he must search for the path towards survival. Not just Subaru and Rem, but also the kind older brother who had helped them and return him to his sister's side. That was why. Subaru, Flop-san, let's run. Flop, that's sudden. What happened? Subaru, there's no hows or whats, life is finite. We can't waste even a second, right? It would be a bad move to stop here and earnestly try to persuade the other. Subaru made such a judgment, same as previous times, he would use forceful reasoning to destroy Flop's resistance. Sure enough, swallowed up by the momentum, Flop just nodded in agreement and voiced, that's true. Flop, life is short. For the sake of achieving my sister and I's goal, although time should indeed be treasured. Subaru, let's run. Run towards the bar immediately. The trivial matters can be discussed later. Flop, you understood. I understand already, so stop dragging me. My bangs will get messed up. Forcefully dragged away by his arm, Flop cried out as he stumbled over his feet. Listening to Flop's shriek-like voice, Subaru advanced toward the road he once took with the same goal of getting a bodyguard. He hurried toward the bar. However, the goal was not to get a bodyguard for the sake of their travels. For the salvation from this series of unavoidable deaths, for the sake of obtaining the necessary help as soon as possible, they ran. You want to hire the strongest one here? The barkeep they finally found raised his eyebrows in response to Subaru's ragged breath inquiry. The middle-aged barkeep, whose hair had started to gray, stared at the panting Subaru from top to bottom with somewhat skeptical eyes. With his demeanor and his age, Subaru too realized that he was lacking in persuasiveness. Moreover, he had barged into the bar, and suddenly brought up a question like that. You could even say he had been generous enough to not immediately jump to the conclusion that Subaru was messing with him. Currently, Subaru and Flop are inside the bar, which was their original destination. At first, Subaru had been killed instantly by some unknown method in the alleyway within the immediate vicinity of the bar. That in of itself had been unsettling, but perhaps because rushing things turned out to be effective, the clutches of the devil that would have stopped Subaru and Flop, who instead hurriedly hastened toward the bar, had not made their appearance. However, it would be premature to assume that they had escaped from danger on the basis of that argument. Subaru, that's why, I have to borrow the strength of the strongest one here. Barkeeper, if we're talking about the strongest one here, that'd probably be Rowan. The barkeep shrugged his shoulders at Subaru, who had asked again while gathering his breath. Then, he proceeded to look at the other person besides Subaru, Flop, who was also out of breath. Barkeeper, Flop, here I thought you haven't shown your face around in a while, and here you are helping someone again, huh? Even though you won't get a single penny out of it anyways. Flop, hey now, I'm just doing whatever kind of deals I want to partake in. Those whom I partake in deals with aren't limited to just people. At times, I take on unfavorable deals against the world itself. Barkeeper, I'm saying there's no profit in doing that, you softy. Perhaps because the barkeeper had been on quite familiar terms with him, he commented on Flop's actions with a speechless tone. Despite hearing directly from Flop why he had helped Subaru's group, it seemed his kind nature was a well-known fact to someone who knew him beforehand. While the barkeeper polished a glass cup, he shot a sharp glance towards Subaru. Barkeeper, he's a real softy like you've heard. But, don't you get the wrong idea here. This dumbass and his sister are softies that will help anyone regardless of who they might be. In turn, there are a lot of people that are indebted to them. Subaru, I don't have any intention of being an ungrateful bastard either, I'll pamper him back just as much as I have been pampered. Flop, ha, I shall look forward to that. The day I'm going to be pampered, that is. While fixing his bangs with a comb he took out of his pocket, Flop returned a candid response. Feeling saved by Flop's kindness and magnanimity, Subaru turned towards the inside of the bar and asked, which one is Rowan? Barkeeper, Rowan's passed out over there at the, corner over there. Subaru, passed out at a corner. That doesn't sound like good news. While saying so, Subaru looked nervously at the direction the barkeeper pointed at. Upon which, within the dim bar, and amongst several men that chattered drunkenly, he found a man who was slumped over at a table in the corner. It was a man in his 50s, his long and disheveled hair tied up sloppily, along with his weapon of choice, a katana, sheathed by the waist. The table he had slumped over on was lined with several empty glasses. One can tell he really knocked himself out in every sense of the word before the sun had even set. Subaru, that's the strongest, you say? Barkeeper, there's no doubt he's got a terrible drinking habit, but he's a master of his trade. Though he's got a terrible drinking habit. Subaru, you mentioning that about him twice only makes me even more worried. Subaru received the barkeeper's warning about him having a bad drinking habit 2 times consecutively. Though he had been considered as quite the drunkard, beggars couldn't be choosers. Right now, what was most important was not his personal conduct or the toughness of his liver, but his prowess in combat. That of the person who possessed the ability to save the desperate Subaru from his impending doom. Subaru, hey, Rowan-san, could you hear me out for a bit? Rowan, ga? Subaru steeled his resolve and headed towards the table Rowan passed out on along with Flop. As he spoke to the collapsed man while shaking him by his shoulders, Rowan responded in a stupefied voice and raised his head. Face flushed completely red paired with a sleepy gaze, as well as facial features that would have been rather discernible if it weren't ruined by a reddened nose. Rowan, what's up, bro, what do you want from me? Subaru, this dude's wasted. Anyways, listen to me. I have a job for you, reek. Rowan, oh I, ain't ya a rude one? After getting up wobbly, Rowan exhaled a drawn-out breath which Subaru had to turn his face away from. As the dreadful stench of alcohol wafted, it even created an illusion that his vision had somehow been warped. It was not something as simple as drinking during the day. There should be a limit to how heavy of an alcoholic a person was. Subaru, come to think of it, because there isn't anyone I already know to be a heavy drinker, this is my first time dealing with this type. Roswell and Otto too would only drink in moderation. The people in the Amelia camp who habitually drank alcohol were Roswell and Otto. Ram and Frederica would drink too, but only if invited. Besides them, nobody else drank. Subaru was also apparently of drinking age in this other world, but he had more or less gone until now without feeling the need to drink. Subaru, so honestly, I don't really have a good impression of drunks, but... Hey, this guy's really the best one here, right? I'm not playing around here. Barkeeper, what a coincidence. I don't have this place open to play around either. There's no mistake, it's him. Subaru, shit, you're serious. Receiving the barkeeper's reassurance, Subaru turned back to Rowan with a bitter look. Rowan was sitting sloppily in his chair and shaking an empty glass upside down above his head, desperately trying to taste any droplets of alcohol left with his tongue. Rowan, TSK, ain't enough booze. Oi, ya brothers, treat me to a drink, why don't ya? Flop, HM, you want a drink? Okay. Barkeep, a drink for him. Subaru, wait a sec, Flopsan. I really shouldn't be saying this since I've been saved by your kindness, but just for a little bit, keep your goodwill in your wallet. Shutting down Flop, who was about to treat someone just because they requested it, Subaru positioned himself in front of a displeased-looking Rowan. Then, he placed his hands on the table with force. Subaru, Rowan-san, let's get straight to the point. We won't be treating you to a drink. But, I can pay you the money you need to buy drinks. I want you to take a job. Rowan, on, a job. Subaru, that's right. I'd like you to be an escort. And also, starting right this very second. Getting close to the stink of alcohol, Subaru boldly laid out those conditions. Hearing his talk, Rowan stared back at Subaru with sleepy eyes. Rowan, your tone's pretty panicked. Ya brothers are in quite a dangerous situation, aren't ya? Subaru, yeah, it's no laughing matter. What do you think? The amount I can pay, this is my limit. Flop, mister, that's... Widening his eyes in surprise, Flop attempted to stop Subaru's action. However, Subaru halted Flop, who was trying to restrain him, instead and assertively put on the table the bag which contained all of the money he got after selling the witchbeast's horn. As a precaution, he had not split and passed some amount to Rem. This was genuinely everything Subaru's group had on hand. There was no more money that he could pay beyond this. Rowan, whoa, this is... Subaru, this is everything I can pay with. What do you think? Will you take it? Rowan. Opening the mouth of the bag, Rowan went silent as he confirmed the contents with a quick glance. His face was still red, but the drunken look in his eyes from before was now gone, a look of serious scrutiny replacing it. Of course, an escort that could be hired at a bar to show someone like Rowan, who worked as a knockoff mercenary, all of the funds that Subaru walked around with was a fairly large gamble. Having crossed national borders, Subaru was not well informed on the value of goods in the Empire. However, he felt that the value of currency was not so different from the kingdom of Lagunica. With the money Subaru had offered up, one could easily live a year just monkeying around. Rowan, my skills are first rate. I thought of saying that, but this amount up front. Subaru, I'll say this now, but I can't negotiate any increase in payment. Rowan, I ain't doubting ya. Ya VE said why ain't playing around, it seems you're serious about it. Scratching his scarlet-turned nose with his finger, Rowan slowly stood up on the spot. He picked up the money bag Subaru had handed out and carefully kept it in his pocket. Rowan, I ain't giving this back even if you tell me to give it back. Subaru, it's a shame, but I won't tell you to return it. If you do your job right. Rowan, pua. A breath reeking of alcohol being let out by his laugh, Rowan accepted Subaru's job. Hearing his answer, the tension in Subaru's shoulders, present for all this time, faded away. His nervousness would not go away and uncertainty endlessly circled his insides, but... Flop, mister, was that alright? That money was... Subaru, it's fine. It's nothing if it means we're safe now. I'm sorry for scaring Flop like that, and also thank you for introducing me to this place. Flop. If you say it's okay then I'm okay too. Thankfully, we paid for the inn in advance. In terms of the accommodation bill, Subaru had already paid for it, including Flop and Medium's part, who they shared rooms with, under Subaru's group's name. It seemed like he avoided the dishonor of passing the bill off to them by not thinking ahead when hiring Rowan. Rowan, so, employer. How shall I address ya, dot. Subaru, oh, right. My bad. I was in a rush. My name is... Rowan, wait. Asked about his name, Subaru panicked as he thought he disrespected Rowan. And as he was about to name himself, Rowan stopped him. He thrusted his hand in front of Subaru's face and directed his sharp gaze behind Subaru towards the bar's windows. Subaru, Rowan? Rowan. It's a weird feeling. Say bro, you were tailed weren't ya? Subaru, Rowan's low and quiet voice made Subaru swallow his breath. Beside him, Flop, confused, said what does that mean, but Subaru had a general idea on the presence Rowan had detected. It was not a what-if scenario, it was definite. The weird feeling Rowan had gotten was the being that tailed Subaru, the enemy that had attacked Subaru in the alleyway. The enemy who had killed Subaru 3 times had not given up on Subaru this time as well. Flop, just who are you being chased by? Subaru. I'm not kidding when I say this, I don't know. I just thought that if we stayed outside, they would come after us. That's why I hired you. Rowan, I see. They should have picked a better fight. It was a situation where they had nothing to work with, yet Rowan said that in a joking manner. However, even if Rowan's tone had a hint of nervousness and seriousness, there was no worry in his voice. That probably meant he had reasonable confidence in his skill. In reality, the drunkenness had disappeared from Rowan's eyes and the atmosphere he gave off was now that of a strong individual. Rowan. Rowan's specialized weapon was a singular katana sheathed on the left side of his waist. It was late saying this now, but to see a katana as a sword of choice was rare in this other world. Rowan's weapon was a distinct irregularity against the Western-style swords that were the norm. Looking closely, together with the atmosphere emanating from his disheveled hair, Rowan's appearance somewhat resembled that of a samurai. However, he lacked a certain intensity, so maybe a Ronin was a better description for him. Subaru, Rowan-san, they are. Rowan, there's no need to be a scaredy cat. No matter who they are, if they're gonna stand in front of me, all that is needed is to cut them in two. There's alcohol in my belly and my sword's in top shape. Subaru, so this isn't drunken fist but drunken sword? Can't say I've heard of that. Nevertheless, it did not sound like a lie, and Subaru put his faith in Rowan's self-confidence. Moving around to the opposite side of where Rowan was glaring at the window, Subaru pulled on the sleeve of the Flop, who had still not fully taken in the situation. Subaru, Flop-san, let's have Rowan-san handle this. Flop, handling things and whatnot, I still don't quite understand the situation. What are Mr. and Bodyguard Kuan fighting with exactly? Subaru, that's something I still don't know yet. Faster than Subaru could reply with a statement which would only arouse Flop's worry, the situation changed. However, the situation did not develop in a manner in which the enemy had charged in from the front and Rowan had burst out for a counterattack. Bway! Spilling those cries of pain, a man with a large build fell at the entrance of the bar. With that sudden occurrence, Subaru literally jumped up in surprise. However, the other customers in the bar who saw the man had a shallow reaction, as if they were used to the sight. The drunken customers, besides Rowan, they probably worked doing mercenary-like activities as well. Those people simply stared at the fallen man with little reaction. The only people who rushed to the fallen man's side were Flop and the barkeeper. Only, the one who was actually worried about the man was Flop, and it was obvious on the face of the barkeeper that he just did not want his floor to be dirted. Flop, hey, you. Are you alright? Get a hold of yourself. Large man, fuga. Flop, fuga. Is that your name? Get a hold of yourself, fuga Kuan. Subaru, no, Flop-san, that person's. Flop tried to get the fallen man up, but the man responded with a groan. It was not like the man was courteously introducing himself to a person he met for the first time. Adding on to that, a man entering this bar in this situation meant that. Large man, fuga. Subaru, Flop-san. Get away. Flop was leaning down, endeavoring to get the face-down man up by pulling on his arm. Having gotten a terrible feeling, Subaru immediately pulled Flop back down onto the ground and got him away from the man. On the very next moment. Large man. The body of the man who was groaning and saying fuga expanded, and for a brief flash, shone bright scarlet. Then, the expanded body of the man ruptured and a great explosion threw the inside of the bar into chaos. Customers, Guaza! Screams echoed inside the bar and red flecks of light scattered around the area. Right after, they became flames that burned and spread. Subaru came to the realization that the man who had blown up had been used as a human bomb. Subaru, Flop-san. Flop, I am fine, mister. But, this is... Subaru and Flop, who had been juggled around by the blast wave, stared in shock at the state of pandemonium inside the bar. The reason the man's body had exploded was most likely because he had been forced to hold onto fire magic stones. Looking at his anguished face, the fire magic stones may have been inside his body. Those detonated, and fire scattered about. Additionally, that was not all. Customer, cough. Wah, what the hell? My eyes, my ears. Inside the overflowing inferno, one of the drunken customers who had gotten caught up in the mess covered his face and screamed out. Looking around, that man was not the only one who was screaming, the other men were doing the same too. Having been blown away, the men who were engulfed in the lingering smoke from the explosion at the center of the bar covered their eyes and nose, shouting in great pain. And then... It's no good if we stay in the bar. Everyone, hurry up and get out. Subaru, why? A man shouted while tears poured down his face, and several men, with their faces covered, rushed for the entrance all at once. Looking at the men jostling against each other, Subaru tried to raise his voice in an effort to tell them to stop. The man who had exploded, and the smoke accompanied with pain after that. Subaru felt like both of those had contributed to the disorder within the bar, and were attempting to guide people into escaping outside. However, even if Subaru were to raise his voice out of desperation, it would not halt the footsteps of those men driven by pain. As a result, Subaru, HK. A second explosion occurred, blowing away the men flooding the entrance altogether. The second one was larger than the first, and the men caught in its radius were unable to even protect each other as they were charred black, scorched from the front by the bursting flames. The explosive heat and the blast wave surged towards them, and Subaru was petrified by the gruesome scene. Nightmarish sights taking place one after another, it all seemed unreal. Subaru, is. Rowan, get a hold of yourself, client. It's gonna be troublesome for me if you collapse right here. Subaru, While Subaru remained petrified and dumbfounded, he was seized by the back of his collar and was forcefully dragged to his feet. The person responsible for it was Rowan, who had his face covered with the sleeve of his clothes. He gestured for Subaru to keep a low posture, ensuring he would not inhale the same smoke that had tormented the other men, and Rowan, barkeep. We'll head out from the back. The front side's under watch. Barkeeper, got it. It's this way. Listening to Rowan's instructions, the manager nodded obediently as blood flowed down his forehead. Like that, Rowan made a sign with his hand behind the bartender, who was moving as if he were crawling across the floor, and slapped Subaru's back, shouting, "Go! Rowan, client, and the young man over there. Get moving right now if you don't want to die." Flop, "Oh, of course, I can't afford to die. Both my little sister and I are still in the middle of our journey." Subaru, fuck. Receiving Rowan's encouragement, Subaru and Flop pursued the manager ahead of them. While chasing after him, Subaru's mind was filled with confusion and rage directed at both himself and the enemy. Of course, there was anger towards the enemy who had committed such atrocious deeds. However, he was also angry with himself, as he had failed to recognize the threat level of the enemy, even though he had known the enemy was present. To begin with, the enemy had done something to cause a dragon carriage to go out of control in the main street. A considerable number of people must have been caught up in that. If that was so, Subaru should have been more earnest with his thoughts. He should have acknowledged the fellow as someone who did not pay any heed to the damage to their surroundings. Because of that, the men, who had only been at the bar, had gotten entangled in. Barkeeper. The back door won't open. Having arrived first at the back door, the manager cried out in front of the self-reproaching Subaru. He was desperately trying to open the door, but it would not answer his panicked calls. Perhaps the damage from the explosion had bent the door out of shape, or... Flop, this is bad. The front entrance is already demolished. If this goes on... Rowan, arg, out of the way. A door like this is... In the bar, the vermilion flames were growing intense, and in a situation in which the black smoke was about to swallow them, Rowan had leapt out, almost as if he were thrashing out Flop's shout. And then, upon placing a hand on the katana by his waist, he drew and slashed it at the unopening door with great force, with nary a single flash of his blade. Subaru, oh. The silver gleam shot forward, cutting away the closed door with a slash. It was a sword skill similar to IAI, one which Subaru knew. Despite performing a slash that caused Subaru to be mesmerized involuntarily, Rowan did not show his pride for it, and kicked down the remainder of the door. Rowan, it. It opened. Everyone, keep low. Freeing the back door that had previously been sealed, Rowan called out to Subaru and the others behind himself. An enormous amount of confusion was spreading far and wide, but it looked like they would be able to get away from the inescapable situation that was the bar in flames, at least. Subaru had also understood that Rowan's judgment in battle, as well as his skills, were trustworthy. All they needed to do was to distance themselves from this place, and for their evil opponent. Subaru. Suddenly, Subaru held his breath. Something was nagging at the back of his mind. He attempted to predict the thoughts of his scrupulous, ruthless enemy. They had thrown a man-turned-human bomb into the bar, lured out the people inside using smoke-containing stimulants, and blew them away at once with the mana stones they had set up at the entrance. And then, they had obstructed the entrance, and utilized some method to seal off the back door as well. Subaru and his group had broken through that blockade, and were able to escape through the back door, but... Subaru, Rowan S.A. Something is wrong, Subaru attempted to put his minuscule feeling of discomfort into words. If his opponent were a thorough one, then it would be impossible to think they would let up their offensive. In order to convey that eeriness, Subaru called for Rowan. There was no reply. Rowan. Leaning forward from the back door, Rowan's body teetered backwards, then fell. Subaru, Flop, and the barkeeper stared at the fallen Rowan, shocked. His head, specifically the area starting from his forehead and above, had been destroyed, and his eyes were hanging out, having been extruded. No matter who looked at it, Rowan had died, his head pulverized. Barkeeper, Gazing at Rowan's appalling state of death, the bartender widened his eyes, attempting to scream. However, he could not even do that. A single blow was swung with the other side of the flames, piercing through the chest of the manager, who had taken a deep breath, viciously tearing apart the upper half of his body. Scattering the bones and organs from inside his body, the barkeeper rolled straight into the fire. The scent of burning flesh immediately reached Subaru's nose, but the barkeeper did not scream. He had been killed instantly. Beyond the flames and the smoke that filled the area, something gradually made its appearance. Stepping over the slashed, torn-down door, the silhouette of a man with damp cloth wrapped around his face had appeared. He had a firm grip on the long-handled axe in his hands, and Subaru understood that it was the weapon that had crushed Rowan's head and given the bartender an instant death. However, his understanding ended there. "Flop, who in the world are you? Why are you doing this?" Having watched the deaths of Rowan and the barkeeper just like Subaru, who was unable to move out of dismay, Flop spoke with a trembling voice beside him. Although he was swamped by fear, he was glaring at the silhouette among the flames with a solemn gaze. As if he were directing his animosity towards the villainous man, who had massacred the people in the bar one after another with such viciousness. However, Flop, don't think you can get away with tea. Flop, while attempting to condemn the man's wrongdoings with a firm attitude, received a direct strike to his head from the man's axe. The man would not do anything meaningless, such as bashing him with the back of his axe without aligning the edge of the blade. He adjusted the angle of the blade, slamming it into Flop's forehead where his long bangs were draped over, and spilled the contents outside. Brain matter flew about, and Flop died as the crimson hue of his blood blended together with the red flames. His body crumpled into a heap while making a loud splash. Blood slowly flowed out, staining Subaru's bottom as he sank down onto the floor. No, Subaru's pants were already soiled by something vastly different. Out of fear, he had been unable to control his bladder. Subaru was frightened by the terrifying appearance of the man that held a blood-stained axe amidst the inferno. His soul quivered at his vindictiveness, his persistence, his dreadfulness. Subaru, why? It was an awfully foolish question. Flop had been killed unsparingly after asking a similar question. Of course, there was no reason for the man to be merciful only towards Subaru. He would likewise perish. He would be killed. Subaru did not possess the strength to draw back, nor the courage to crawl away. Right now, he was unable to take his eyes off the man. Even if gazing at the man filled his being with terror, he could not look away because that was equally as horrifying. Subaru, why? Why? Just like an idiot who only ever repeated what he knew, Subaru yelled out with desperation. The man did not respond despite hearing him shout. He slowly lifted up his axe, his face remaining hidden, and positioned it straight above the sitting Subaru's head. And then... Subaru, why? I won't tell you anything. Won't it be troublesome if you run away again? As Subaru shouted out with a bleeding heart, the man at last gave a reply. Listening to the man's tone and voice, which sounded as if he was only stating the obvious, Subaru's breath caught in his throat. He attempted to match the voice with a voice he had heard somewhere, and... Subaru, BH? The axe swung down faster than he could do so, splitting his skull in a single blow. There was a small, hard sound. There was. Chapter 18, Battle in the Fortress City of Guaral. If he closed his eyes, Subaru could recall the scene in his mind. The middle of the dense jungle where an abundance of trees grew thickly, the muddy soil, and the atmosphere of the imposing men. The witch beast's roar that reverberated across as if to split that atmosphere apart. The fighting spirit that would rise and excite alongside the start of battle. And the intense malice that would be directed towards Natsuki Subaru due to his involvement in inviting the witch beast. That was an action Subaru himself had acknowledged and consciously decided to carry out, and had put it into practice. He had acted after placing a scale within himself, comparing what was important to him and what was not. It was an action done with the full determination and intention to cause harm. What would happen to people inexperienced with fighting witch beasts if they actually fought one? He did not know. They could have subdued it instantly. There was also the possibility that they could have become seriously wounded. He did not want to think about it much, but instead of ending there could have been those who lost their lives. No, he should assume there were. After justifying his own deed, he should at least acknowledge that fact. After all, he was the one who had decided and acted on such an action. Natsuki Subaru chose the side of the scale he desired, and put a plan into practice, where others may die. These other people were not witch cultists or sin archbishops, nor were they wicked people who would cause harm to others for bad intentions. He had attacked individuals who chose to take up arms just to make ends meet. They were merely following orders from their superiors. These were people who, under the right circumstances, he could have formed positive relations with. Therefore, this occurrence was justified, inevitable and natural. The consequences of Natsuki Subaru's actions must be paid for by Natsuki Subaru. Flop, mister, it's no good to have a scowl on your face. Subaru. Flop, good fortune won't come to anyone who doesn't have the time to smee mister. The instant after the bladed edge of the axe sunk into his skull, Subaru's field of vision became clear with a ring of a hard sound. What jumped out in his unclouded vision was the figure of Flop, prodding his brow with his finger. The pretty boy with his long bangs and slender face. Recalling the event that had come to pass a few dozen seconds ago, his head being split open, Subaru quickly covered his mouth and fell to his knees. The rising need to vomit. The link between all the malicious acts that had occurred to him, his heart beat like it was about to explode, his organs felt like they were being strangled. That, and the deafening ringing in his ears, tormented Subaru. The voice of Flop worrying for Subaru sounded far off. No sound properly registered in his brain. Subaru, Todd. Listening to the intense ringing in his ears and the screaming of his organs, Subaru's lips produced a short sound. That sound was the name of someone he became acquainted with in the Valachian Empire. He was someone towards whom Natsuki Subaru had for the first time acted with purely antagonistic intent, and he was the malicious assailant that had caused the great tragedy that occurred moments ago. Subaru. The flaming bar and the stifling black smoke. The reason the drunken customers had fallen victim to the axe one after another was because of an irritant in the smoke. It was probably a simplified tear gas of sorts with strong irritative spices mixed in. However, despite it being pseudo-tear gas, its effects were immediate. Using magic stones to cause a fire and sealing the entrance to lead the survivors to the back exit. Barring the back door and using the moment of relief after they broke through, an ambush was performed on the strongest survivor, and they were executed. Then, using a soaked cloth to protect himself from the smoke, he directly, with certainty, killed Subaru. His last words and voice, and above all else, the eyes he saw of the masked man indicated his true identity. That was Todd. The man that was supposed to have died in the Budheim jungle. Subaru, no. That was simply unconfirmed information. The Imperial Army's camp fell into a state of ruin after the people of Shudrak's attack, under Abel's command. After hearing that there had been many casualties, over 100 casualties, fearing that more pain would be compounded upon him upon further words, he shut out any other information beyond that. After that, he had quickly taken Rem along, and decided to leave Abel and the rest. That was why he had not even tried to think about any survivors from the attack on the encampment. That included the attack Subaru chose to do himself against Todd's group, which was unrelated to the attack by the people of Shudrak. Subaru, if this is the nearest city to the jungle, of course any survivors would run away here. Having had their camp attacked, any Imperial soldiers who had escaped by the skin of their teeth would inevitably head to Guaral. Yet, that thought did not cross Subaru's mind, and so, he had nonchalantly stepped his foot into the city where enemies would be waiting. Plus, with Rem in tow. Subaru, enemy. That word that popped in his mind, he once again tasted the bitterness of that word on his tongue. Back when he was living in his original world, the term enemy was something that would only appear in manga or games. Even after being transported to another world, the target for that term only extended itself to adversaries like the witch cult and witch beasts. Meaning, this was his first time to call someone who was not one of those, an enemy. This enemy was one created by none other than Natsuki Subaru's own actions. Subaru, GRK. Making a harsh sound, Subaru strongly grit his teeth. Biting on his cheek meat, utilizing the searing pain and taste of blood to grab his consciousness by the collar, he forcibly pulled himself back to reality. If that were not enough, he did not mind biting off all the meat inside his mouth. He had no use for constricted organs, loud ringing ears, trembling hands and feet, nor for a paralyzed brain. He could not be beaten down by malice and fear right now. Even if he was just putting on a bold front, until the situation changed, he could not take it off. Flop, mister, get a hold of yourself. Mister. Want to drink some water? Subaru, I'm fine. My bad, I worried Flopsan. The color of his face and the tone of his voice probably did not signal that he was fine at all, but Subaru told himself he was fine while slowly standing up. The shaking in his knees and the discomfort from his paralyzed organs still remained. However, he could not stay crouching forever. While Subaru was being spoiled by weakness, time was still marching forward. Waiting for the right moment to strike, Todd's plan of attack should still be in motion right now. Subaru, hey Flopsan, can I ask you to do me a favor? Can you go back to the inn and get the medicine for my chronic illness from Rem? Flop, medicine? Are you under some bad sickness, mister? Subaru, yeah, my glossy ankle disease is getting pretty bad. Flop, oh my. Haven't heard of that before. Being told a random disease name, Flop widened his eyes in surprise. Taking advantage of Flop's goodwill left a bad taste in Subaru's mouth, but he turned a blind eye to it, convincing himself that he had no choice. For now, Subaru had to prioritize getting Flop as far as he could from himself, as soon as possible. If Todd's aim was revenge and if Flop and Subaru were to split up, he would have no choice but to go after Subaru. Once Flop's safety was guaranteed, Subaru could focus on protecting himself. He had still not decided on what was the correct option to take though. Subaru, I can meet up with Rowan at the bar, leave it to escape the surprise attack. Then, he had no other choice but to perform a rather haphazard plan. Given that he did not have the time to stop his legs and think things through slowly, he could only put into actuality the best action he could think of at this very moment, and hope to pick up a miracle as he went. Subaru, Rem should. When Flop returned to the inn to retrieve the medicine for the unheard of disease, Rem should figure out that something abnormal had happened to Subaru. She should, he hoped. Once she figured that out, she would stop Flop from returning to this area, he believed. It was all a lot of wishful thinking, but that was the limit of Subaru's thought process at the moment. Subaru, Flop-san, please. Flop, oh okay. Wait here. Keep your chin up, mister. Hit with Subaru's genuine seriousness, Flop treaded the path back to the inn. Sending Flop off, Subaru decided instead to hurry to the inn. Getting the drunk Rowan sober as fast as he could, he would smack him with money and hire him once more. Rowan had fallen prey to the ambush, but in a straight fight, he would have enough strength to win. Subaru hoped for that too. He was depending on luck a lot, but he put his hopes on Rowan, pleading for him to be the strongest in Wallachia. About to start running with a praying heart, Subaru abruptly heard a hoarse voice from behind him. Seeing as this was an unpopular alleyway, the voice he heard could only belong to one person. The problem was, what emotions did the owner of that voice experience to produce such sounds and what that consequently meant? He quickly realized that those sounds would by no means be leading to a good conclusion. Flop, wah. What followed the hoarse voice was the scream of Flop, who had gone the other way. Turning his head around immediately, Subaru found Flop flipped upside down at the street ahead. Fallen face up, Flop was clutching his right leg. A small knife had pierced through his thigh. The knife, which was buried deeply to the heel, took away the ability to run from Flop. Subaru, Flop-san. Hurriedly turning back from his running position, Subaru bit his lips as his feet skid on the ground. Then, without pause, he kicked off the ground and ran over to Flop, his leg injured. Again, his expectations had been suddenly subverted. He thought that if they were to split up, Todd would definitely prioritize Subaru and go after him. Yet, contrary to his calculations, Flop had suddenly been attacked. Furthermore, getting attacked at this place and at this very moment was beyond his expectations as well. Subaru, Flop-san. I'll bring you somewhere to treat that straight away. Holding various regrets and remorse, Subaru rushed to Flop's side. Flop was writhing in agony from the pain in his leg, but Subaru did not have the time to treat him right now. He had to lend his shoulder and take him to some place with people. No, he could not let the situation develop like it had before, at the time he had perished after being run over at the main road. Even if he had to be forceful, he had to drag him to the bar. That was the best option. The fact that the knife had struck his leg was a silver lining. Because, as long as a major artery was not pierced, there would be no real danger to his life. Subaru. His thought process leading him here, a question abruptly appeared in Subaru's mind. It was good news that Flop's life was not in danger. Yet, how was that so? Seeing the method in which the massacre at the bar was conducted, the enemy's skill in killing was first-rate. In spite of that, the attack against Flop ended at his legs. Why was that? This was knowledge from manga, but this information was about a technique used by snipers in battle. Snipers, who would hide themselves to perform one-sided attacks against faraway opponents, when faced with a group of enemies, would purposely not kill their opponent and instead stay their hand after majorly injuring them. Then, they would lure out the ones who would try to rescue their injured comrades and strive to extend their hands of death towards them. It was a nightmarish method that took advantage of those who had a sense of fellowship, of those who could leave no man behind. Why did he remember something like this at this moment? That was because Subaru, sure. The instant that he felt something was wrong, a dark light flashed in the alley next to the fallen Flop. Immediately after, a sharp, frontal strike smacked and blew Subaru away, who preemptively threw his hands up in an effort to protect his head. Subaru, gah! Eating the hard strike completely, the blown-away Subaru hit the back of his head hard on the ground. His vision went white and the ringing in his ears became loud again. While that was happening, he was pushed further back with momentum, rolling over once. Subaru tried to discern the true form of the strike, and the distance from which it was launched. Unable to completely block the strike, he stretched his hand to his forehead, where he felt a warm sensation. It was likely that his forehead was cut from the hard strike and Subaru, ah! His right hand, which he attempted to use to touch his forehead, had been blown off at the forearm onwards, between wrist and elbow. Subaru, jigaya. His right arm, which showed its jagged crosscut with white bone and pink muscle fibers, pumped blood out energetically in sync with his heartbeat. Panicked, he tried to stop the flowing blood by putting pressure on the wound, but the palm of his left hand was also cut down the middle, his crushed fingers each all facing a different direction. It was proof that he had unfashionably suffered an attack from the opponent. First of all, if he were to say that, running to Flop's side without any precaution had been a mistake. Mistake. Ahem. Holding the overflowing blood, Subaru fell into panic, triggered by pain and a sense of loss. A man holding an axe in one hand cleared his throat in front of that Subaru. He was a figure that appeared from the alley. A young adult who tied up his orange hair with a bandana. It was Todd. He was not hiding his face this time. The malicious-eyed Subaru had personally seen at the bar. Subaru had not mistaken the true identity behind them for someone else or another. As expected, Todd had set an attack with the full intention to kill Subaru. Subaru, UGIGOEI3A. The molars he was biting down on cracked and Subaru glared at Todd with bloodshot eyes. He did not know himself if the meaning behind that glare was anger, hate, or more shamefully, just a plea for his life. Nevertheless, Todd's response was cold. He, showing a face that did not present much emotion, traced the bladed edge of the axe which destroyed Subaru's arms. Todd, I need to make sure to properly sharpen this or it's no good, my bad. He said that lightly while reflecting on his actions. Subaru, ka. Todd, all right. Opening his eyes wide, Subaru attempted to form words with his trembling tongue. However, Todd was indifferent to Subaru's words, and nonchalantly swung his axe upwards. It was as if he had no interest in Subaru's words or identity. You have. Todd, whoa. However, before Todd could swing the axe he raised up, someone jumped on his body. It was not Subaru, groaning in pain due to his destroyed arms. With this situation of Subaru having been rendered useless in a single strike, in order to protect him, a person jumped Todd. Flop. Taking a knife to his right leg, the good-willed merchant who should have been fighting against intense pain was grabbing onto Todd's back as if he were going to sink his teeth into him. He looked at Subaru over Todd's shoulder. Flop, mister. Run away. Run away right now. Putting urgency on his slender face, Flop's strong-willed expression jerked up as he was struck on the chin. The grappled Todd used his elbow to forcefully hit Flop. The young adult, being far divorced from violence, was easily peeled off. Then, facing the fallen Flop, Todd raised his axe. Subaru, STO. Todd, 1, 2 and 3. Subaru was not given the chance to stop him. Todd lightly exclaimed and next, an intense, sharp sound of water splashing reverberated. Hit by Todd's elbow, Flop, facing upwards, received the blade of an axe to the face. The young man, having his entire face and head split in two, swiftly became a corpse. Blood flowing, brain matter spilling, his arms and legs twitching. Witnessing the alleyway steadily becoming soaked with blood, Subaru's mouth fell open in disbelief. Pain, confusion, and rejuvenated fear. Subaru's normal thought process was stolen by nothing but those emotions. Just, what was the man in front of him? Subaru, I get. Todd, Subaru, I get that you resent me. I get it. Avoiding the blood from the dead Flop, Todd turned to face Subaru as he spoke to him. Subaru's tears and mucus actively gushed out in thick drops. Blood flowed from his broken molars and additionally, he was covered in the blood spurting from his right arm. Subaru was in quite a horrible state. He had not wet himself this time, but that was no comfort of any sort. He had yet again let Flop die. He had devised a method in which he thought he could save him, but because of Subaru's inadequacy, Flop had died. He had let him die with a face unpresentable to his sister, Medium. Subaru, but everyone else. Don't bring them into it. There was a reason to resent him. It was hard to admit that it was justified, but it was a natural from what had transpired between Subaru and Todd. That was why it was inevitable that he would come after Subaru. But, to involve other people for that was against the rules. It was a cowardly act. It was far from just and fair. That was evil. Was that not evil? Subaru was at long last even starting to lose the mental faculties to verbally assault his opponent. Listening to his statement, Todd hummed in a small voice. Todd, what do you mean by resent? He spoke, standing in the bloody alleyway, as he craned his head in question, wiping the blood that had reached his cheeks. Taking in that naive-sounding attitude and answer, Subaru held his breath for a moment, but quickly a violent emotion he could not control burst out. With spit flying, he said, "Don't you dare play dumb. Subaru, ambushing us, setting traps, relentlessly pursuing me." Relentlessly, he had relentlessly been pursued and cornered. No matter what action Subaru would take, he would anticipate and stay one step ahead to kill him with certainty. Meticulously preparing and laying out traps. Going through that much effort to target Subaru. There was no point in feigning ignorance now. That was just being unreasonably stubborn. It was a desecration of Flop's death. Embarrassing Subaru, was this his way to vent his anger? "Subaru, are you?" "Todd, I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but killing you isn't because of resentment or anything, obviously. I found a dangerous-looking guy in town. Of course I'd kill, no questions asked." Subaru. "Todd, you kill a poisonous snake not because you resent it, but because you fear it. For that, you'd use anything at your disposal to kill it." Saying that it was nothing more and nothing less than that, Todd neatly picked off the bits of hair and skin that was stuck to his axe. Were those the fragments of Flop's destroyed head? Subaru could only stay still in shock. There was no lie in Todd's composed response and attitude. He even responded with a smile. Since the beginning till now, Todd's attacks against Subaru proved that he was serious about his words. Todd regarded Subaru as dangerous and could not help but kill him. That was why he would not listen to him, not let him do anything, and nor would he try to interrogate Subaru for any information. Also, he did not hate him for the deed done in the jungle. The only impression that Todd had gotten out of that was that Subaru was a dangerous being. As a consequence, Todd would unemotionally and dispassionately try to kill Subaru. "Todd, you are the same as me. I will not give you time." Saying that, Todd put his foot on Subaru's chest and kicked him. Unable to resist, Subaru fell down backwards, facing upwards. Todd straddled the fallen Subaru and raised his axe. Subaru widened his eyes. He looked for the correct words. Returning by death, he would find the through line behind various events. That was how Subaru seized victory. However, this strategy that worked even on Sin archbishops had moments where it did not work. That was when. "Subaru, why?" "Todd, I won't wait." That was when the opponent was a cold-hearted cutthroat. "Flop, mister, it's no good to have a scowl on your face." Subaru, HK. "Flop, good fortune won't come to anyone who doesn't have the time to." "Well, what's the matter? Your face has suddenly gone pale?" Upon seeing an axe coming down right on their head, surely most people's faces would be drained of blood. Without thinking, Subaru put his hands to his own face, cold from the lack of blood. Relief and fear churned within him, as the hands that felt that coldness confirmed the truth that he was alive and well. Subaru, damn it, again. What should he do? Subaru did not possess even the slightest idea. In regard to time, all the events that had happened to Subaru had transpired in only 20 minutes. Within those 20 minutes, Subaru had already lost his life 5 times. Even during the last round at the Pleiades Watchtower, he had piled up over 15 experiences of deaths in search of victory, but then, there was confidence that progress was being made step by step. But this time, he had nothing. The corpses of Natsuki Subaru had accumulated, but he did not really feel they were contributing to his victory. If there was one thing that could be said, it was, "Subaru, even now, I'm being watched." Already, Todd was observing Subaru with Flop. Consequently, the moment he separated from Flop, Todd would mercilessly use Flop as bait. It would be a different story if Subaru had the ruthlessness to be able to use Flop as a decoy, but since he could not do that, if Flop were assaulted, Subaru would put forth every effort to save him. This was different from the time he had weighed the safety of Rem against the welfare of Todd and company. Flop had been kind to utter strangers, or rather, to Subaru's group. Subaru did not have it in him to choose an option that would leave him for dead. So, carrying out a strategy on his own apart from Flop was impossible. Simultaneously, the option for Subaru to return to the inn had also been snatched away. It was not clear at what point in time Todd had noticed Subaru's presence, but if he had been discovered on the way to the tavern, the location of the inn, Rem's whereabouts, had not been exposed. Yes, Rem's location had not been found out. That was quite believable. Supposing Rem's whereabouts had been found out, Todd would be sure to make use of Rem, and utilize her in order to kill Subaru more systematically. It was ironic that his faith in Todd's cunning conversely became proof that Rem had not fallen into his hands. Subaru, anyway. While biting his lip and covering his face with his hand, Subaru desperately turned his head. Time, somehow there was not enough time. If he parted ways with Flop, Todd would begin his offensive immediately. On the contrary, waiting for his offensive and counter-attacking well, he was not the sort of opponent that could be beaten even if his first attack were avoided. Since Subaru had no weapons, he would have to eliminate his opponent's fighting strength in a single strike. No way. If they escaped to the main street, Todd would recklessly drive a dragon carriage and kill by running them over. Even if they avoided the rampaging dragon carriage, the chances that he would then take advantage of the chaos in the street were high. On top of that, the rampaging dragon carriage would drag in uninvolved bystanders. No way. If they chose some other route, each and every alley would be his hunting ground. North, east, south, and west, keeping an eye out in all directions was impossible. Even if they dealt with his first attack, in the end the plan to counterattack would be the same, and their lack of fighting power lay ahead. No way. Would the best thing to do after all be rush to the tavern with Flop, and before Todd could get ready to attack the tavern, prepare fighting forces to intercept him? The obstacle would be how seriously he could take the drunk Rowan, but right now this should be the plan with the highest chance of victory that he could think of. No other move came to mind. Subaru, fuck. What a troublesome opponent to have made an enemy of. In the case of Sin Archbishops, they had the nice point of their reliance on their authority turning their strengths into weakness. Since by working out the mechanism of their authority, conversely the weak points of those guys would become evident. However, Todd did not have that. He would use anything he can. He had stated so himself. He did not rely on anything, and he did not take damage to the surroundings into consideration either. After killing Subaru, how on earth he planned to explain that to the people around him, even that was a complete unknown. No consideration had been given to what would come afterward whatsoever. In order to kill what must be killed, there was a fear of superfluous thoughts interrupting. Flop, mister? You alright? If something's wrong, going back to the inn would be. Subaru, and no. Hell no. That's a bad idea. He responded with great force, and Flop stared in wonder at that voice of Subaru's. Having done that, Subaru seriously cursed his own mental fragility. If he displayed such odd behavior, Todd would end up becoming suspicious. If that happened, the valuable advantage of return by death would disappear. Beyond what he had already grasped, the only way Subaru could take advantage of Todd was his preconception that his presence was not known to Subaru. Ambush and trap, escape and counterattack, whichever means he utilized, Todd could not be made aware of what Subaru was aware of. Well, actually. Subaru, wait. Suddenly, as Subaru was desperately thinking of countermeasures against Todd, a thought crossed his mind. Todd did not stick to any one way of doing things, or even take damage to the surrounding into consideration. Still, he paid no mind to damage to the surroundings. That was not damage to himself. Rather, this surprise attack was because he wished to drastically diminish the damage to himself. Todd had stated it himself, with his own mouth. You kill a poisonous snake not because you resent it, but because you fear it, he had said. So he had said, then. Subaru, Todd. I know you're here. Flop, wah. Abiding by a thought that flashed through his mind, Subaru shouted at the top of his lungs. Startled, Flop jumped at the sudden occurrence. However, it was more than likely that Flop had not been the only one. Todd, who had been tailing and keeping a close eye on Subaru and Flop, should have been startled as well. Counting on Todd's moment of bewilderment, Subaru sharpened his glare, contorted his expression menacingly. While holding up the nastiest, most evil-looking demeanor possible, he swept his gaze around. Subaru, what a persistent bastard. Here I thought you had perished for good after all that went down, but it seems you managed to survive by some devil's luck. However, don't think I'll let you get away this time. I'll fucking kill you. Using the most threatening voice he could muster, Subaru spewed curses imbued with malice and hostility. In a way his voice would definitely reach Todd no matter where in the alleyway he was hiding, and so that the message Natsuki Subaru has caught on to your presence would be conveyed. Subaru, do you seriously think you can win in a fight against me? That's beyond hilarious. You make me laugh, ha 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 ha. Can't wait to see it again, the pathetic way you look running away, that is. Revealing his two trump cards of provocation and mockery, Subaru burst out in laughter at the middle of the alleyway. Thank God I don't have stage fright, thought Subaru, as this was the only time he was sincerely thankful for his shameless personality. If it were not for that, the tremble in his voice, the fear on his face, and the terror in his eyes would have been exposed. It was thanks to Natsuki Subaru's lousy personality that he was able to conceal those emotions. Flop, and mister? Subaru, shush. Flop-san, be quiet. Shutting up Flop, who had been completely dumbfounded by Subaru's sudden change, Subaru pulled him by the arm and began walking brazenly. Returning via the way they came was not possible. For starters, it had been confirmed Todd's hiding laid somewhere over there, probably. Hence, he stopped in the middle of his tracks, and while turning his head toward the depth of the alleyway. Subaru, oh yeah, you're welcome to come at me any time. I shall rip you to shreds, as you wish. He was not sure whether Todd would get it, but he added his middle finger as his last provocation. Doing so, Subaru was able to hide the pounding of his heartbeat while heading towards the end of the alleyway wearing an audacious smile. Subaru. Honestly, that was a complete gamble. There was a chance that Todd would become enraged from Subaru's provocations and jump into the alleyway while swinging his axe, which would not have been a completely unlikely scenario at all. However, Subaru trusted that it would not come to pass. Todd would not go into a fit of rage. That man was the type that would gradually search for the best move in a composed manner and carry it out. That was why the bluff Subaru had been dishing out should be able to work on Todd. Having spotted Subaru in the street and developed an intent to kill, if Todd's train of thought were followed, he would have most likely come to the conclusion that Subaru must be eliminated because, to him, Subaru seemed like a ticking time bomb. Choosing a surprise attack as the method to rope in and grasp victory in his hands was just a means to the end. As long as it worked, then all would be well. If that was no longer suitable for execution, he would just move on to the next best option. Todd had not been particular with his methods. That was the difference between him and the Sin Archbishops. Subaru would use that adaptability of Todd to his advantage. Subaru, next up is. He carried out the strategy that had popped in his head in the heat of the moment, but the next steps had yet to be decided. If Todd's caution towards Subaru grew stronger, that would mean spare time until the next wave of attack existed. While the chance was in his hands, Subaru must make a decision between fight or flight. Choose fight, then it would be necessary to get Rowan from the bar involved. As long as no better alternative showed up, borrowing his strength would be the best bet. Choose flight, Subaru would have to go to the inn and grab Rem, then escape from the city. He felt bad, but he would have to ask Flop and Medium to come along as their safety were most likely in jeopardy. Then, in the case that they decide to escape from the city, the place Subaru can go to was Subaru, so that was why. Flop, mister? Though he stayed on guard of the alleyway behind, but, in that instant, Subaru's eyes had become bloodshot. The fear toward Todd, remorse toward Flop, concern toward Rem, affection toward Emilia, longing toward Beatrice, all of those had, more or less, been forgotten in that instant. Forgotten, having grasped the feeling that had surfaced, Subaru firmly closed his eyes. Then, Subaru, we need to get out of Guaral as fast as possible, before my bluffs are seen through. After deciding the next course of action, Subaru wasted no time. Even after he got out of the alleyway with his plan in motion, Todd did not make any moves. It must have been because he had become extra cautious due to Subaru's provocations, which proved to be effective. However, the effects of those bluffs could only last so long. Subaru, he'll definitely catch on soon. We have to get out of here as fast as we can. Their only option was to run away. Making up his mind, Subaru gave Flop a brief explanation and took him along, towards the place they had just left, returning to the inn which they departed from before he had met his demise 5 times. They dashed up the stairs. Then, after pounding on the door to the room occupied by Rem and the others, they rushed inside hurriedly. Subaru, Rem. Are you Oka? Whoa. Medium, Yua. What, so it was you guys? Had almost killed you there. The door left wide open, Subaru's neck was against the icy blade of a halted machete. Its welder Medium gave a soy apologetically as she sheathed her weapon. Behind Medium, further inside the room, was Rem, who watched that whole exchange as she whitened her eyes. Rem, what is this about all of a sudden? I thought you had left yet you came back so soon. Subaru, Rem. Rem, HK. Surprised by his sudden return, Rem began berating Subaru as the color of his face changed. But instead of stopping to hear everything she had to say, he rushed to her side and threw his arms around her. Her breath caught in her throat, and her shoulders shrunk in, with her slender body being embraced so suddenly. And then, Rem, please let go of me. Subaru, yeah, that was my bad. Got a little bit too carried away there. Rem, I understand that. From the looks of it, something serious must have happened. She calmly pulled him off herself once he had made sure she was truly safe. Subaru steeled himself for the rebuking that never came. Rem instead sighed for a good moment, let slide his behavior and then continued. Rem frowny face, well then. What happened? Subaru, I got spotted by a really bad guy. I managed to give him the slip, but that won't really help us for long. We can't stay here anymore. I know we just got here, so I'm really sorry, but... Rem, so we need to leave the city, right? I understand. Louis-John, could you please get our luggage? She had caught on to the fact that there was no time for an in-depth explanation. So she quietly accepted the current state of affairs. Of all things that could have happened, Louis really did as Rem told and heaved the luggage onto her back. Wait, something's off here. Subaru, why? Why haven't you unpacked? Even though we settled down at the inn. Rem. Subaru, wait, Rem, by some chance, did you? She remained silent under his inquisitive gaze. However, her silence was as good as affirming his exact suspicions out loud. Subaru, so that's why. No wonder you accepted my proposal to come here so easily. Flop, I'm sure you have a lot to mull over, mister, but now isn't the time, is it? Subaru, Flop-san. Digesting the incomprehensible feeling of Rem's attitude, Subaru covered his forehead and Flop tapped him on the shoulder. The earnest countenance of Flop urged Subaru to action. He must not waste the time created by the precious once-in-a-lifetime great charade. Flop, my sister, we're leaving town with these three. I'm told there's a dangerous paramour after the mister. We gotta let Mrs. and Niece Y get away. Medium, okay big bro. But, I already took off my boots. Flop, so put them back on, my sister. Shoes can be worn any number of times. That's their strength. Medium, oh. Amazing, big bro. You're a shoe genius. After hearing Flop's determined persuasion, Medium assented and rushed to put on her boots. Since it was an exchange between siblings, the outsiders did not interfere, but Subaru found that back and forth to be highly dubious, as he lifted Rem's body and held her. Rem, wait. At least put me on your back. Subaru, it's an emergency evacuation. And the wooden rack is in their ox cart. Flop-san. Where's the cart? Flop, at the inn stable. And let me tell you, it's no exaggeration to say Boatcliff is our third sibling. A cute little brother that we can't leave behind. Medium, big bro. Boatchan is a girl. Flop, a cute little sister. Louis, ooh. Ooh. In spite of the pressing situation, every person coming along was incredibly boisterous, and Subaru hurriedly ran downstairs with Rem in his arms. Subaru, sorry about the noise. Please accept the fee for the room. Passing by the inn's reception desk, Subaru and company flew out the door without requesting a refund for not staying. They went straight to the stables and found the ox cart tethered with their things inside it. Subaru, how's the speed of a Phalo if running at full power? Flop, I haven't let her run at full speed even once. Well, my sister, how fast do you think? Medium, I dunno, but probably faster than big bro. Hearing that unreliable answer, Subaru gave Rem a boost up to the back of the ox cart. Immediately Louis rushed in, and he tossed her up next to Rem, and opened the entrance to the stable. Flop and Medium got into the coachman's seat, and the preparation to escape was complete. And then... Rem, what is a paramour? What sort of explanation did you give Flop-san? Subaru, now's not the time. Flop-san, get Boatcliff running at full speed. Flop, I know what I'm doing. Run, Boatcliff. Subaru climbed into the back of the cart and Rem pulled on his sleeve with reproachful eyes, but without answering her question Subaru called out to Flop's back. Hearing that, Flop wielded the reins and struck the tough brave ox Boatcliff on the back. And so, the ox cart broke into a run. Slowly. Subaru, this is super slow. She's walking. Flop, Boatcliff. Run for me. Listen to your older brother, Boatcliff. Rem, it would appear she does not consider you her brother. Rem's words felt like the truth, but Boatcliff's running speed its walking speed did not change. At this rate, it would honestly be much better if Subaru carried Rem on his back and everyone ran for it. And, just as Subaru's sense of urgency was growing in intensity. Medium, Boatchan. Ruin. Or else, I'm gonna make you dinner. Boatcliff, moo. She pulled out her barbarian swords and hoisted them overhead, and Medium shouted while rubbing them together to make sound. Her smile encompassed her whole face, and perhaps sensing the truth in her words from Medium's behavior, the next second, Boatcliff let out a loud, deep sound and began ferociously running down the street. Subaru, Uwaya. The intense acceleration and shaking caused swaying, and from the back of the cart Subaru let out a scream. Flying out of the stable, Boatcliff rushed onto the main street, and the feeling of drifting from the sudden change of direction caused Subaru to nearly be thrown from the back of the cart, but Rem had promptly grabbed his hand. Subaru, that was close. You saved me, Rem. Your hand is so smooth. Rem, Subaru, don't let go so quickly. Naturally, a superfluous thought leaked out, and with his hand released, Subaru's head hit the cart. But fortunately, he settled without getting thrown off, and everyone remained on board the running phalo cart. Continuing on, the phalo cart speedily raced down the road as it headed for the city gate. It drew eyes as it moved left and right, dodging other dragon carriages, ox carts and canine carts. Subaru, once we pass the main road, we should reach the main gate where the inspection was. Rem, it does not seem like things will go that smoothly. Subaru, what? Wait, oi 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 oi. Subaru widened his eyes on gazing at what Rem was pointing towards, up ahead of the speeding phalo cart. In their path stood men clad in armor, engraved with the national seal of the Swordwolf. They were deployed in a way to block the main road. Imperial soldiers were attempting to obstruct their path. Subaru, it's Todd, isn't it? He changed plans and called for his friends. There was no sign of Todd among the Imperial soldiers that awaited them, but the reason they were obstructing Subaru's group right now was no doubt because of Todd's influence. Receiving Subaru's taunt at the alleyway, Todd figured he would be at a disadvantage by himself, and so he gathered his comrades. It was definitely a very logical and necessary decision on his part. Subaru hated how correct and appropriate his deci. You shits. Don't think y'all can get away. In place of the absent Todd, at the head of the deployed troops, stood a familiar face. A man whose right eye was covered by an eye patch. His features looking as if someone had painted roughness and wildness directly onto it was Jamal. He accompanied Todd and, without a doubt, the man on whom Subaru set a trap on in the jungle. Seeing that Todd was alive, it was no surprise that he was alive as well, but... Jamal, you've got some balls sending a witch beast at us. You're fucking dead. Subaru, he simply hates me. It's kind of a relief that way. Watching Jamal shout in anger with bloodshot eyes, Subaru felt peace of mind, knowing that his attitude was more human. However, having said that, that did not mean that Jamal's existence as a threat was gone. Including Jamal, the lineup of Imperial soldiers were a plain threat. Just how were they going to break through? Medium, big bro, hold them reins tight. I'm counting on ya. Flop, no worries, give it to them sis. In the limited time Subaru had to make a decision, before he could choose his next action, the duo at the driver's seat, the O'Connell siblings, Flop and Medium, gave their answer first. Subaru did not have the chance to stop her. Medium positioned her legs at the tip of the driver's seat and leaned forward, falling. Medium, hop. Kicking the seat using her feet, her body shot forward with the speed of an arrow. Machetes drawn, she flew in a straight line and plunged into the enemy's formation head-on. Medium, hi-ya-ya. Clawing the earth with her heel, Medium forcibly stopped herself using the enemy line. She then swung her arms. Her machetes swept forward as it ravaged the air, generating an intense shockwave. The armored Imperial soldiers were blown back far and wide, spewing blood. Subaru, as she's strewing. Rem, is that how you compliment a girl? Subaru, what else am I meant to say? It is a compliment. Medium sans strong as hell. Despite Rem's cold-hearted comment on his honest opinion, Subaru exclaimed loudly at Medium's unexpected fighting prowess. Hearing Subaru's voice, Flop, sitting at the driver's seat, proudly scratched his nose. Flop, how's that? That's my sister's true strength. I'm utterly hopeless at fighting, so my sister and I cover for each other and... Subaru, crush your weaknesses, right? I understand now. Flop, you get it. As if Subaru's answer was to his liking, Flop's eyes shone brightly and he flashed his white teeth. This was second-hand information from Flop himself, but Subaru could confirm it to be true with his own eyes now. Medium rampaged on, overpowering the Imperial soldiers that were blocking their way one after another, forcefully clearing a path for the phalo cart to get through. Subaru, at this rate. Don't get so cocky, you shitty bitch. Medium, Yukian. Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, Subaru pumped his fists. It was at this moment. At that moment, a flash of a drawn sword assaulted Medium. She blocked the attack with her machetes but was sent flying as if she were paper. Medium was shocked by the attack. The man who sent her flying also wielded blades in both hands. It was Jamal. Jamal, we've already had our numbers reduced, I ain't gonna lose any more just from this scuffle. Y'all hurry up and prostrate yourselves under my foot. Medium, Kaya. Wah. Big bro, this guy's strong. Subaru, for real. Angrily showering them with words of abuse, Jamal swung his dual blades and attacked Medium. She blocked the strikes, but Subaru could tell, even from an outsider perspective, that she was inferior in fighting strength. It was his first time seeing Jamal fight properly, but his skill was far higher than the impression Subaru had got of him before. It made Subaru think that perhaps the Elgina he had set on Todd's group to beat them in the jungle had been beaten back by none other than Jamal himself. Subaru, this is bad, there's not enough distance. Thanks to Medium's hard fighting, the number of Imperial soldiers blocking their path had decreased. It seemed possible to break through by relying on the Phallocart's momentum and charging in, but that was only if Jamal, who was standing imposingly in the middle of the street, was not there. As long as Jamal was there, they could not hope to get away. Flop, sis. At that moment, Flop called out. The cornered Medium glanced in the direction of her brother's loud voice. Perhaps he was about to yell out words of advice that would help turn around this impossible situation. Subaru hoped, but alas. Flop, you can do it. The advice Flop shouted out was unmistakably just telling her to believe in herself more. Hearing those words, Subaru's mind went blank. Even Jamal was dumbfounded. However, for Medium O'Connell, for a person with who was bonded through blood, the reaction was different. Medium, I can do it. Receiving her brother's encouragement, Medium roared. Her machetes screeching loudly alongside. From her stance focusing solely on defense, she switched to a ferocious offense. A flurry of blades assaulted Jamal's entire body. Jamal, you think a desperate attack like that will work on an Imperial soldier? Medium, UGI. However, Jamal parried her ferocious blows with his dual swords, striking her with his own counterattacks. Medium grimaced from the pain, blood trickling out of the lacerations she had sustained on her arms and legs. Despite that, she continued to stay on the offensive by putting in the effort she could have used to defend herself instead, pressing ahead with preventing Jamal from moving away. Thinking of the possibility that Medium would stay there to pin Jamal to his spot, Subaru attempted to let out a desperate shout, "No, don't," and then, "Rem, take this." Subaru, whoa. Rem, what are you? Rope? Right as he was about to shout, Rem had shoved the rope on the platform into his chest. It appeared to be quite long, also thick and sturdy, something worthy of being used to secure cargo to the cart. However, in front of the puzzled Subaru, who was unsure of what to do with the rope. Rem, person with the eye patch. Rem called out as she stood up, carrying a crate that had been stacked on the platform, and then flung it towards Jamal with a gallant throw. Jamal whirled around, responding to the call with an "ah." Once he saw the crate heading his way before his very eyes, he easily sliced the wooden box in half with an annoyed swing of his arm. And then, his whole body was showered with the spices that had been packed inside the crate. Jamal, whoa. Wah, this is. Jamal waved his arm around from the discomfort, his vision obstructed by the scattering powder. At that moment, Medium tried to take advantage of the opening that had been created, aiming for his back with her machete, but Rem, Medium-san. The Phalocart had arrived at Medium and Jamal's battlefield, quicker she could do so. And then, Subaru held the rope Rem had given him high above his head, throwing it towards Medium. Looking at it, Medium prioritized grabbing the rope over attacking Jamal. Medium, I got it. Subaru, I gotcha. The moment he heard Medium's voice, Subaru endured the added weight to the rope with his entire being. He thrust his feet into the loading platform, supported Medium's weight, and helped her return. Seeking to jump back onto the Phalocart, Medium took a step forward, about to make a jump with the aid of the rope. Subaru and Rem would retrieve her, and then they would break through the front gates, heading out. Jamal, I said, don't think you can just escape. The next moment, a furious Jamal cut through the cloud of spices, bursting forth from it. Like that, he set his sights on Medium's back as she positioned herself to jump away, ruthlessly attempting to bring down his dual swords on her. In a nick of time, Medium would be felled into a sea of blood from Jamal's strike. Jamal, but Rem, this is payback for what happened by the river. Jamal's face was smacked by the wooden rack that Rem had tossed from the platform. The rack that had been handed out to the O'Connell siblings fell apart upon colliding with Jamal's face, having completely finished its role. Jamal was flipped over, and Medium returned to the Phalocart. She threw out her machetes onto the platform, and then proceeded to lie down with her arms outstretched. Medium, oh no. That was close. Big bro, that was close. Flop, oh, indeed, dear sister. You two also did very well, Mr. and Mrs. You saved us. Medium, really. Thanks. You saved us. Subaru, no, not at all. We're the ones who were saved. Medium, who had made her way back onto the loading platform, and Flop, who had cheered for that fact. However, the siblings' gratitude was misplaced. In this city, the two had continued to save Subaru and his group, right from the beginning and to the end. On top of that, he had gotten the siblings involved in his group's circumstances. How could he make it up to them? Gate guard, halt! Halt! Hal! Whoa! Although a gate guard tried to stand in the way in an effort to stop the speeding phalocart, he ended up leaping to the side in order to avoid it. The phalocart did not let up its momentum as it passed the guard, heading for the front gate with Subaru and his companions on board. The cart would zip out of the city at once, whilst throwing the queue for the inspection process into disarray. What an outrageous situation! Subaru and company had only stayed at Guaral for less than 3 hours. However, they managed to drive past the inspection area and pass through the front gate. Subaru wanted Boatcliff to do her best, since she would need to keep running in order to shake off the group's pursuer. And then, he would have to tell Flop and Medium about Subaru. Amidst the uncontrollable shaking of the platform, the cart blew past the front gate and exited the city. Subaru's field of vision opened up, and he was able to discern the wide plains and the horizon. It was just as the cart was about to finally make its escape, when a silhouette plummeted towards Subaru from right above the gates, an axe raised high into the air. Orga! A single strike was swung downwards, descending upon the crown of Subaru's head as if it were slicing a piece of bamboo in half. The blow was one that Rem nor Medium, as well as neither Flop nor Lewis, were able to react to. It was nightmarish, something that could not be guarded against if it had not been predicted. However, Subaru, I knew it. Subaru received the axe strike that rained down on him with the machete Medium had dropped on the platform. Subaru had guessed that the instant he and his companions had succeeded in their escape, the moment where they would let down their guard the most, would be capitalized, and a single blow would be driven into the target Subaru's head. If it were Todd, that would be what he would do. The horror Subaru had experienced 5 times over had assured him of it. Todd, I should have killed you, after all. Subaru, GHK. Todd forcefully pressed his axe further with malice gleaming behind his eyes, attempting to split Subaru open. It was a good thing for Subaru to receive the axe with the machete, but his hands had grown numb from the impact, and it was only a matter of time until he would drop the weapon. Neither Rem nor Medium would make it in time to the lock of weapons that was placing Subaru's life on the line. Even though he had managed to dodge a fatal strike, if things went on like this, he would be killed by 2. Subaru, whoa! All of a sudden, the force behind Todd's axe had grown weak. When Subaru glanced over to see what was happening with a frown, he saw Lewis clinging onto Todd, her arms secured around his body. She shook her blonde hair loose, struggling desperately to put an end to Todd's act of violence. Todd, don't get in the way, kid. Lewis, AUH. Shaking off Lewis's interference, Todd mercilessly slammed his elbow into her face. Elbowed by him, Lewis let out a shriek and fell over. Subaru, HK, son of a bitch. Witnessing that event unfold, Subaru gritted his back teeth as he exerted his strength to push back against Todd. Todd stumbled back from the sudden action, creating distance between himself and Subaru after the brief moment where their weapons had locked together. However, this was within Todd's range. He raised the long handle of his axe. The next blow was about to come. Before that, Subaru, you're watching, right? Do it, Kuna. Holly. Subaru shouted out with all of his might before Todd could unleash his axe strike. He was unsure of how far his voice had echoed across the plains. He was unsure, but Kuna, bye, Subaru. Don't forget, I'll be watching. Holly, yep. The voices reverberated inside his skull, almost like a reply in an instant. The sound of something hurtling through the wind pierced the air. And then, it flew straight across, absorbing itself into Todd's side. Todd, Ka. With a small cry of pain, Todd was sent flying at breakneck speed as his body jerked to the side. Unable to keep himself boarded on the platform, he was thrown off the phalocart as he spun sideways, tumbling to the solid ground without managing to break his fall. He rolled twice, and then thrice, his figure growing increasingly distant. Subaru, ha, ha. Rem, WH what just. Todd was now absent from the phallocart's platform, having been tossed off. Subaru dropped to his knees as the machete fell on the spot, and Rem was propping up Lewis, who had received an elbow strike, in her arms. Rem also had a confused expression on her face from what had just occurred, but Subaru had a sense of confidence, one which told him that they would receive assistance if they could make it past the gates. The origin of his certainty came from Subaru, that nasty fucking emperor. I'll make sure to punch you when I get back. Subaru spat out that venom as he sprawled across the phallocart's platform, whilst picturing the face of the villainous man who must have known everything.